I opened the door and suddenly her lips were on mine. It was like a lightning strike, unexpected, impossible to process. For a few seconds, everything stopped: the noise from the street outside, the soft hum of the refrigerator. Even the air in the room seemed to freeze. My stepmom. It wasn't long. Just a brief, barely there kiss, but it hit me like a freight train. She pulled away, her face turning away from mine, clearly shaken by what had just happened. My heart raced and I had no idea what to say. It wasn't planned. It wasn't even something I thought could happen, but it had. Her hand shook slightly as she adjusted her hair, avoiding eye contact. I didn't mean for that to happen. She stammered, her voice trembling. She was clearly as stunned as I was. The weight of the moment pressed down on both of us, and for the first time I saw her as more than just the distant woman who had married my dad. This wasn't just an accident, it was something that couldn't be ignored. I stood frozen, still, tasting the remnants of her lips on mine. My mind raced, trying to piece together what this meant, but all I could do was stare at her in disbelief. Unable to form a single coherent thought, her eyes flickered back to me for a second, filled with a mix of confusion, regret, and something else I couldn't quite place. "I'm sorry," she whispered before walking away, leaving me standing there, lost in a whirlwind of emotions. That kiss was the start of something I wasn't ready for, and it was only the beginning after that night. Everything felt different. We didn't speak about the kiss, didn't mention it at all, but it lingered in the air between us, like a quiet whisper. No one wanted to acknowledge. Every time we crossed paths in the house, it was there hanging over us. I started seeing her in a different way, noticing things I hadn't before, the way her fingers traced the edge of her glass at dinner, how she nervously tucked her hair behind her ear when she thought no one was looking. It was like I was seeing her for the first time, but I didn't understand why. I didn't know how to feel confused, guilty, excited. I found myself lost in my thoughts, replaying that moment again and again. Was it just an accident, something that shouldn't have happened, or was there more to it? Every time I looked at her, I found myself asking the same question. Did she regret it, or did she feel the same pull that I was feeling? One evening, a week or so after the kiss, I walked into the kitchen and there she was making dinner like everything was normal. The smell of roasted vegetables filled the air, but I could barely focus on it. I stood there awkwardly, not sure if I should say something or just leave. She didn't look at me, but I could tell she knew I was there. The tension was so thick, it was suffocating. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you remember that night?" She didn't turn to face me, her back still toward me as she chopped the vegetables. But her words hung in the air like a challenge. I swallowed hard, unsure of what to say. "Yeah, I do." There was a long pause. She stopped chopping, her hands resting on the cutting board, but she still didn't turn around. "It was a mistake. You know that, right?" Her voice wavered, but there was something else in it, something that made me think she wasn't entirely convinced by her own words. I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "Yeah, a mistake." But even as I said it, the words felt hollow. Was it really just a mistake, or was it something we both wanted but didn't know how to admit? She finally turned to face me, her eyes meeting mine for the first time since that night. There was fear in them, but also a strange kind of vulnerability. "We can't let it happen again," she said softly, almost pleading. But there was something in the way she looked at me, a hesitation that made me think maybe she wasn't as certain as she pretended to be. I nodded again, though my mind was far from clear. Yeah, of course, but deep down I knew we weren't done with this. The kiss had changed everything, and pretending it didn't happen wasn't going to make those feelings go away. I could see it in her eyes, feel it in the way the air seemed to thicken every time we were alone together. As I turned to leave the kitchen, I caught a glimpse of her reflection in the window. She stood there, her hands gripping the counter, as if she were trying to steady herself. She looked just as lost as I felt. This wasn't over, not by a long shot, and I wasn't sure if either of us knew how to stop what was already in motion. From that moment on, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were both teetering on the edge of something dangerous, something we couldn't control. Every glance, every word, even the silence between us, felt loaded, like we were both waiting for the next step to happen, even if neither of us wanted to admit it. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that maybe I didn't want to stop it. A week passed, but the tension between us only grew stronger. Every interaction, every shared glance, felt like a game we were both playing, though neither of us knew the rules. I told myself to stop thinking about her, to let that kiss fade into a memory, but it didn't work. She was everywhere in my thoughts. In the way, my heart sped up when I heard her footsteps in the awkward silence that seemed to fill every room we were in together. Then came the day. Everything changed. It was late afternoon and I had just finished running errands. My phone buzzed with a message from my dad saying he'd be working late again. The house was quiet when I got home, and I assumed she was out as well. But as I headed to my room, I heard the faint sound of music coming from the garage. Curious, I followed the sound. I found her there, sitting in the driver's seat of her car, the garage door open and the soft hum of the radio filling the space. She looked up as I approached, a small surprised smile on her face. "I didn't know you were back," she said. Her voice soft, almost hesitant. I shrugged. "Yeah, just got in." I gestured toward the car. "Everything okay?" she sighed, turning off the radio and stepping out. "I was just thinking," she said, running a hand through her hair, "needed some time to myself." We stood there in the quiet garage, the air between us, thick with the tension that had been building for weeks. I knew I should have walked away before anything else could happen, but something kept me rooted to the spot. I could see the same conflict in her eyes, the desire to move past what had happened, but also the pull of something deeper. "I've been thinking too," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked at me then, and in her eyes I saw the same thing I had been feeling: confusion, guilt, but also something we both were afraid to name. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, without saying a word, she took a step toward me. My heart pounded in my chest. As she closed the distance between us, her hand brushed against mine so light I almost didn't feel it. But that single touch was enough to send a wave of electricity through me. "I can't stop thinking about it," she whispered, her voice trembling. Before I could respond, her lips were on mine again. This time it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't something that just happened. It was deliberate, intentional, and we both knew exactly what it meant. I kissed her back, the weight of everything we'd been holding back, pouring into that moment. It wasn't like the first kiss that had been hesitant. Uncertain, this was different. There was no hesitation, no holding back. It was raw and real, and it scared the hell out of me. She pulled away first, her breath shallow, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and something else. "We shouldn't," she started, but the words died on her lips. She didn't need to finish the sentence. We both knew what she meant, and yet here we were. "We can't keep doing this," she said softly, but her hand was still on my arm, her fingers trembling slightly as they held on to me. "It's wrong." I nodded, though the words felt empty. "I know." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it. It felt wrong, yes, but it also felt inevitable. Like we had been pulled into something neither of us could escape. There was a long silence. She let go of my arm and stepped back, running a hand through her hair again, as if trying to shake off the weight of the moment. "We need to stop this before it goes too far." I wanted to agree, to tell her that we could stop that. We could go back to the way things were before. But the truth was, I didn't want to stop, not anymore, and judging by the way she was looking at me. I wasn't the only one. She must have sensed my hesitation because she sighed deeply, her shoulders slumping. "This can't happen again," she said, more to herself than to me. But there was no conviction in her voice, just exhaustion. She looked up at me, her eyes pleading please. I nodded, though the knot in my stomach told me that stopping now would be harder than either of us wanted to admit. "I'll go," I said, though my feet didn't move. She watched me for a moment, as if waiting for me to actually leave. But when I didn't, she stepped closer again. "I don't know what to do," she whispered, her voice barely audible, and then before I could say anything, she kissed me again. This time there was a kind of desperation to it, like she was trying to hold on to something she knew was slipping away. I kissed her back, and for a moment it felt like the world around us disappeared, leaving just the two of us and the weight of everything we weren't saying. When we finally pulled away, the silence in the garage was deafening. She stepped back, her eyes filled with guilt, but also something more, something that told me this wasn't over, not yet. We need to be careful. She whispered, her voice shaking. We can't let this happen again. But even as she said it, I knew it was too late. The line had already been crossed and there was no going back now. After that second kiss, things changed, not outwardly. Of course, we still kept up the same routines, still pretended that everything was normal, but underneath the air was heavy with the knowledge that we had crossed a line. Neither of us knew how to uncross. Every moment alone together felt like a ticking time bomb, one wrong word or glance away from detonating. I didn't know how long we could keep pretending, but it was clear she was trying to avoid it. She stopped lingering around the house when I was there. If she had been in the living room, she'd make an excuse to leave the moment I entered. If I walked into the kitchen, she'd finish what she was doing quickly and vanish. I caught her avoiding my gaze on more than one occasion, and for the first time it felt like she was running away from me. From us, but we both knew it wasn't just about that kiss anymore. There was something bigger building between us, something we both understood but refused to admit. We were trying to outrun it, hoping it would fade away if we didn't look directly at it yet. It followed us like a shadow, growing larger with each passing day. One evening, a few days after the garage incident, my dad had left for a work trip, leaving the house to just the two of us. I didn't expect to see her. By now I had gotten used to her, avoiding me, but as I walked into the living room there she was sitting on the couch with a glass of wine in her hand. The TV was on, but she wasn't really watching. Her eyes were distant, lost in thought. I hesitated in the doorway, unsure whether to join her or leave. Every instinct screamed for me to turn around and avoid whatever conversation was about to happen. But something held me there. Maybe it was the way she looked, tired, almost vulnerable, in a way I hadn't seen before. The walls she had been building between us were starting to crack, and for a brief moment it felt like we were back in that garage, standing on the edge of something neither of us could fully control without thinking. I walked over and sat on the couch, keeping a cautious distance between us. She didn't acknowledge me at first, but I could feel the tension rising between us, thick and suffocating. The silence stretched on until it became unbearable. Finally she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. We can't keep doing this. I knew she was right, but I didn't know how to respond. What could I say that wouldn't sound empty or meaningless? We both knew what was happening, and pretending otherwise wasn't going to change anything. Still, I felt the need to say something, anything to break the weight of the moment. I know I muttered, though even to me, the words felt weak. She sighed and took a sip of her wine, her eyes fixed on the floor. I don't know what's wrong with me, she said quietly, almost to herself. I never thought, this is wrong. I know that, but I can't stop thinking about it, about you. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment it felt like the room had gotten smaller, the walls closing in around us. I could feel my pulse quicken, and I struggled to keep my breathing steady there. It was the truth we'd both been avoiding. She was thinking about me, about us, just like I was. I've been thinking about it too. I admitted, my voice barely audible. It was the first time I'd said it out loud, and hearing the words gave them a kind of finality. I wasn't ready, for there was no going back. Now we were in this. Whatever this was, she finally looked up at me, her eyes wide and filled with uncertainty. What are we going to do? She asked, her voice shaking slightly. I didn't have an answer. How could I? Everything about this was wrong, but at the same time it felt like something. We couldn't stop. I don't know. I said honestly, but I can't pretend like nothing happened. Her face softened, and for the first time in days I saw the same vulnerability that had been in her eyes. The night of the first kiss, she set her windlass down on the table and leaned back on the couch, staring up at the ceiling. Neither can I. There was a long pause, and I could feel the weight of her words sinking in. We were both caught in the middle of something that felt impossible to escape, and neither of us knew how to fix it. She broke the silence again, her voice barely more than a whisper. It's not just the kiss, is it? I shook my head. No, it's not. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders slumping. "I don't know how we got here," she said more to herself than to me, "but we need to figure this out before it gets worse." I wanted to agree to tell her that we could stop that. We could go back to how things were before, but deep down I knew that wasn't possible. We had crossed a line and there was no erasing it. I could see it in her eyes too. She wanted to stop, but we were both too far gone. She stood up suddenly, breaking the tension. One evening a week after our last conversation, my dad called to say he would be gone for another couple of days. Work was keeping him late again. The moment I hung up the phone, I felt a familiar knot form in my stomach. I knew it meant I'd be alone with her. And as much as I told myself to stay strong, I knew we were running out of excuses. It was late. I had been lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to get my mind to shut off. Every thought seemed to circle back to her, the way she had looked at me that night. The fear in her voice when she admitted she couldn't stop thinking about us. I kept telling myself that it was wrong, that we needed to stop before everything blew up in our faces. But the harder I tried to push those thoughts away, the more they consumed me. And then I heard a knock at my door. At first I thought I had imagined it, but when it came again, a soft, hesitant tap. I knew it was real. I sat up, my heart pounding in my chest for a moment. I considered ignoring it, pretending to be asleep, but I knew it wouldn't matter. She knew I was awake. I got up and opened the door, and there she was standing in the hallway. Her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold herself together. Her eyes were wide, uncertain, and I could see the same fear in them that I felt inside. "Can we talk?" She whispered, her voice barely audible. I nodded, stepping aside to let her in. She walked past me, hesitating for a moment before sitting on the edge of my bed. I stayed by the door, unsure of what to say or do. The room felt too small, too quiet, as if the walls were closing in on us. "I don't know what to do anymore," she said, her voice trembling. "I've been trying to figure this out to make it stop, but I can't." I don't know how her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to tell her I felt the same, that I was just as lost as she was, but I couldn't find the words. All I could do was stand there, staring at her, feeling the weight of everything that had happened between us. I thought I could handle it. She continued, her hands gripping the edge of the bed, so tightly her knuckles turned white. "But it's not going away. Every time I see you, every time we're alone, it just keeps getting worse." Her confession hung in the air, and I could feel the knot in my stomach tightening. This was it. This was the moment we either faced the truth or ran from it. But running didn't seem like an option anymore. "I know," I said finally, my voice barely a whisper. I feel the same way. She looked up at me, her eyes searching mine for something. Reassurance, maybe, or an answer. But I didn't have one. All I had was the same confusion, the same pull that had been drawing us together for weeks. "We can't keep doing this," she said, but there was no conviction in her voice. She didn't believe it any more than I did. "I know," I repeated, though the words felt hollow. We had both said it so many times now that it had lost its meaning. We couldn't keep doing this, but we were, and there was no stopping it. There was a long silence. She looked away, her hands still gripping the bed, and I could see the tension in her shoulders. She was holding back, fighting something inside her, but I could also see the cracks forming. She was breaking. "I tried to avoid you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought if I stayed away it would help, but it didn't. It just made it worse." I moved closer, my feet carrying me toward her before I even realized what I was doing. I sat down next to her, the bed creaking slightly under our weight. She didn't look at me, but I could feel the heat of her body, the tension radiating off her like a force field. "I don't know how to fix this," she said, her voice cracking. "I don't know how to stop feeling this way." I wanted to tell her that it wasn't her fault, that we were both caught in something neither of us could control, but the words wouldn't come. All I could do was reach out, my hand brushing against hers. It was such a small gesture, but it was enough to break the dam. She turned to me, and before I knew what was happening, her lips were on mine again. This kiss was different from the others. Desperate, almost frantic, like she was trying to drown out everything she was feeling. For a moment it felt like everything else disappeared. The guilt, the confusion, the fear it was just her and me, and the weight of everything we had been holding back. But then she pulled away her breath, ragged, her eyes wide with panic. "We can't," she whispered, her voice shaking. "This is wrong. We have to stop." I nodded, though. My heart was racing, my mind spinning. I know, but even as I said it, I knew the truth. We had already crossed the point of no return, and no matter how much we told ourselves to stop, it was too late. The line had been crossed, and there was no going back. She stood up quickly, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry." Before I could say anything, she turned and left the room, the door clicking shut behind her. I sat there in the darkness, the silence pressing in around me, and for the first time I realized just how far we had fallen. There was no fixing this, not anymore. The morning after she walked out of my room, the house felt different. Everything was the same on the surface: the familiar walls, the ticking of the clock in the hallway, the faint sound of traffic outside. But inside it felt like the air had changed. The weight of what had happened the night before hung over me like a dark cloud, suffocating, pressing down on my chest with every breath. I tried to go through the motions. I got dressed, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table, staring at my phone, pretending like I wasn't waiting for her to appear. But she never did. The house was empty, and it felt like I was the only one left to face the consequences of what we'd done. I couldn't stop thinking about her, the way her lips had felt on mine, the desperation in her eyes when she pulled away, and the finality in her voice when she said we had to stop. It was like a replay, stuck on a loop, and no matter how hard I tried to focus on something else, my mind kept circling back to her, to us. By the time the afternoon rolled around, I knew I had to get out of the house. Sitting there alone with my thoughts wasn't doing me any favors. I grabbed my keys and headed out, no destination in mind, just driving to clear my head. The streets were busy, the sun high in the sky, but I barely noticed my mind was still stuck on that kiss, the way she had looked at me afterward, like she was breaking apart in front of my eyes. I ended up at the park. It was the same place we used to come when I was a kid, back when things were simpler, back when there wasn't this mess hanging over me. I parked the car and walked, not really paying attention to where I was going, just needing to move to escape the thoughts that were swirling in my head. The park was quiet, the only sound, the rustling of leaves in the breeze, and the distant laughter of children playing somewhere out of sight. I sat down on a bench, staring at the ground, trying to make sense of everything that had happened over the past few weeks. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, to make it fit into something that made sense, I couldn't. There was no making sense of this. My phone buzzed in my pocket, breaking the silence. I pulled it out, my heart skipping a beat. When I saw her name on the screen for a moment, I just stared at it, unsure whether I should answer. But I knew I couldn't ignore her. Not after everything that had happened. I swiped to answer, my voice catching in my throat. "Hey." There was a long pause on the other end, and I could hear her breathing shallow and uneven, like she was struggling to find the words. "I'm sorry," she said. Finally, her voice barely a whisper. "I shouldn't have left like that. It's okay." I said, though it wasn't. Nothing about this was okay, but what else could I say? I couldn't blame her for walking away. I'd wanted to run too. I can't stop thinking about it. She continued, her voice cracking, about last night, about everything. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the flood of emotions that came with her words. "Neither can I." There was another long pause, and I could hear the tension in her voice. When she spoke again, "We need to talk face to face." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "Yeah, we do." We agreed to meet at a cafe downtown, somewhere neutral, away from the house and everything that came with it. I wasn't sure what we were going to say to each other, or if there was anything left to say. But I knew that we couldn't keep avoiding it. We had to face the truth, whatever that meant. When I arrived at the cafe, she was already there, sitting at a table by the window. She looked different, tired, worn out, like the weight of everything had finally caught up to her. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun, and she was staring out the window, lost in thought. I sat down across from her, and for a moment neither of us said anything. The silence stretched between us, heavy and uncomfortable, and I could feel the tension building with every second that passed. "I don't know how to do this," she said. Finally, her voice shaky. "I don't know how to fix this." I didn't have an answer. How could I? There was no easy way out of this, no solution that would make everything go back to the way it was. We had crossed a line and there was no undoing it. "I don't think we can fix it," I said quietly, "not after everything that's happened." She nodded, her eyes filling with tears. I don't know how we got here." I looked down at the table, my mind racing. I wanted to say something that would make it better, something that would ease the pain in her voice. But there was nothing, no magic words that would make this go away. "We can't keep doing this," she said, her voice cracking. "It's tearing us apart." "I know," I said, though my chest ached with the weight of it, "but I don't know how to stop." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with so much sadness that it made my heart ache. "We have to stop for both of us before it gets any worse." I wanted to agree to tell her that we could stop that. We could go back to how things were before, but I knew it wasn't that simple. We were too far in now, too deep, to just walk away without consequences. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I'm scared of what this will do to us, to our family."